We've got a message from the fine folks at Pulaski Preservation Services, purveyors of products there when you actually need them. Seems there's been a lot of talk these days about vault life, but not all of us have the luxury to spend so much on something that, frankly, we may not actually need. Unlike those other guys, the sensible folks at Pulaski Preservation Services have created an affordable line of personal protection products to make sure no one gets left behind. Personal protection, there when you actually need it. Remember, that's Pulaski Preservation Shelters. Simply there when you actually need them. Exact change only.
The following program is made possible with the assistance of a grant from S&H Green Stamps.
Bœuf Bourguignon, French beef stew in red wine. We're going to serve it with braised onions and mushrooms and a wine dark sauce. It's a perfectly delicious dish. I'd better taste. Hello, I'm Julia Child. Welcome to the French Chef and the first show on our series on French cooking. We're going to make Bœuf Bourguignon, beef stew in red wine. And it's a wonderful show to begin our series on because it shows you so many useful things about French cooking. How to brown meat, how to braise onions, how to saute mushrooms, how to make a wonderful sauce. And you make a Bœuf Bourguignon just the way you make any other kind of a stew, like chicken coq au vin. You can make lamb this way or veal this way. And now here's our beef. And I've made quite a few beef stews lately getting ready for this program. And I've tried several different cuts, some from the leg called the top round and the bottom round. And from all the stews I've made, I find that I like chuck the best. So these are various pieces of chuck. This is called the chuck tender, and it comes from the shoulder blade up here. And it makes an awfully nice stew because the meat doesn't get stringy. And this is called the undercut of the chuck, where it's like the continuation of the ribs along here where it gets up to your neck. And here's another piece of it. This, this is called flunkin meat. And that's awfully good. That's sort of from the short part of the ribs of the chuck. And you cut up the meat into pieces about like that. We're going to serve this for 6 people. So we want to have 3 pounds of meat. I usually count on 1 pound of boneless meat for 2 to 3 people. But if you have a good appetite, you want to have a little more than that. And then as you can make this stew way ahead of time, anything that's left over is extremely good. Now we want to get our pan hot, and we're going to saute it in this first until it's brown, and then we're going to put it in this pot into which we're going to cook it in the oven. But before you saute anything, you want to make sure that you have it good and brown, good and dry. So I just take a whole lot of paper towels like that and just dry the meat off. If you don't have the meat dry, you can't brown it because it's as though it were steaming. There's water on the bottom of the meat, and it just steams rather than browns. So you get it good and dry like that. Then we're going to saute this in oil. I usually use a light olive oil, which I get at my supermarket. And we need just enough oil to keep the bottom of the pan nicely filled with oil, and then you can add any more whenever you need to. And then as soon as the oil is hot, and that's a very important point too, because you can't saute anything in meat in oil that isn't hot. It can't be smoking and burning, but it just has to be hot enough so that it's going to brown the meat, and you can tell it's too hot if the oil begins to darken in color. This will take about 4 or 5 minutes to brown. And I'm not going to crowd the pan either. That's another extremely important thing, because if the pan gets crowded, then the meat steams again. I find these wooden spatulas awfully useful. Just keep moving it around so it won't stick. As soon as as all of it's covered with a little bit of the oil in the pan, then it doesn't stick anymore. I'm going to put a little bit more oil in. You can't really give proportions to this, because you just add the oil as you need it. You can use peanut oil, which is perfectly good. You want to be sure with your oil that you don't use any that, when it gets hot, it has a bad odor. Olive oil is, a light olive oil is awfully good. Peanut oil is good, too. See, that's beginning to brown. You want to get it brown on all sides. And if your heat gets too much, you can just turn it down. I'm keeping it up on very high at this moment. And then as soon as I think it's getting too hot, I'll turn it down. You just keep turning it around like that. Now, if you're doing chicken, you do it exactly the same way. If you're doing lamb stew is awfully good, and it's not expensive. You do it exactly the same way. So while you're watching me do this, remember you could do lamb or veal or chicken. Coq au vin is just the same as bœuf bourguignon. Bourguignon means Burgundy, and that's where this dish was invented, in Burgundy, and they usually use Burgundy wine with it. But you can use any kind of nice red wine, as you see. There, that's just about browned enough. Now we'll put this, as it's browned, into the casserole. I'm going to heat up that casserole a bit. That's just, see, that didn't take very long, only about, 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to turn the heat down a bit. These are new tongs, and they stick a little bit. Now, we have in here this nice sort of brown bit here that's left over from the browning. And this is part of your treasure of cooking. It's called a glaze, and we're going to deglaze it with our red wine. We're going to use about 3 cups, or about 2/3 the bottle. And this is called deglazing, when you pour the wine in and you're scraping up all this lovely brown coagulated juice, which gives color to your sauce as well as has a lot of flavor in it. Now we just pour that in, and then we're going to add some beef stock to it. We want just enough liquid so that the meat is barely covered. It's called à fleur in France, which means the meat looks like little flowers. That's just about 2 cups of stock in there. And you can use what's very nice is always a homemade beef stock. But if you don't have that, you can use canned beef bouillon, which is very good too. Don't use canned consommé, because that tends to be a little bit sweet. Now, while that's coming to the boil, we're going to add the rest of our flavorings here. We're going to put in a little bit of tomato paste, about a tablespoon, about like that. And then we're going to put in some bay leaf, thyme, this is first, about half a teaspoonful. And then a bay leaf. There's a difference in taste between French bay leaves and American bay leaves. And if you want it to taste very French, you buy what they call imported bay leaves. You can get them at almost any supermarket. And then, because this is a Bourguignon, we have garlic. So Here's a garlic press. You just put the whole garlic in there and go, "Urgh." That's awfully easy, then you don't get it over your hands. And now, our stew is just coming to the simmer here. We want to give it a little taste to see whether we've got enough salt in it. You want to be very careful not to oversalt at this point because the sauce is going to reduce. Doesn't taste good now at all because the wine is raw. It needs just a little bit of salt. I'll put in, about a half teaspoon there. And now that's at the simmer, and I'm going to put it in the oven. Now this is going to go in a 325 oven, and it should cook very, very slowly, just at the bare simmer. And once it's in, except for checking the oven to make sure that it isn't bubbling and boiling, you don't have to look at it anymore. Very nice dinner that we have. We have our boeuf bourguignon, and we have what the French usually always serve with it, which are boiled potatoes with parsley on them, and a very nice green salad of romaine, and as always, the usual French bread. You're going to see French bread on all these meals because the French always have bread at all of them. And also, we have a red wine. This is the same wine that we use for the cooking. It's a domestic mountain red. It's a very nice wine. Or if you have lots of money, you can buy a fine Burgundy. Except with a beef stew like this, you don't use one of the terribly expensive Burgundies. You use a young, full-bodied wine. Because if you had a very old, delicate wine, the stew being very robust would kill the wine. And when you're serving wine, you want to think of how it goes with the meal, or how the beef and the wine marry. Bon appetit.